Welcome to Way to Be TV, where there's a better way to be than atheist or theist. My name is Elise Elrod. It is Thursday, April 14th, 2016. Joni and I co-host Way to Be TV. She will be keeping us abreast of the chat room activity this evening. Good evening, Joni.
Good evening, Elise.
Have you got any comments? Any comments about last week's show? Because it was a very unusual show.
My opinion of that and your opinion of that are way different. I felt used and abused.
Yeah, you felt a little bit beat on. I know that. You felt like I was getting a little bit beat on. I know that. But it really wasn't bad for me. Matter of fact, I was rather overjoyed about it. And here in a minute, I'm going to talk about just exactly.
I have intentionally isolated myself from being around people who would judge me, and yeah, maybe that's a mistake, but I've enjoyed it.
Well, he was mostly stating his position, and we'll get into that in a minute. Last Thursday evening, we began exploring the Gospel of James. As we ended the first segment, something happened. We have hoped would happen for a year now. Someone came on air to challenge our point of view. He did not enter via the pre-show, as outlined in the event description. He used the link in the description to enter without notice. We set the Gospel of James aside for now and immediately brought him on air. He declined identifying himself any further later during the show conversation. Someone asked me why I was smiling ear to ear during most of the taping. He did something for me personally for which I will always be grateful. He brought my group to life on air. I've heard them in person express themselves in our private sessions many times, but this was the first time on air they expressed their convictions with passion. They are a great group. At one point, Jan said to Duncan, "I am trying to figure out the English behind what you're saying." And I really like that phrase. Duncan's initial premise was not lost on me. He actually made a good point. And I want to share what I heard. Duncan is a presuppositional apologist. Since my fat lips make me stumble over the word presuppositional, I'll refer to the subject as a precept apologist from here on out. Okay, just a precept. First, what was the experience like with Duncan for me? Duncan was an articulate, patient person. He knew his view and delivered it consistently and dogmatically, and with passion. He caught us off guard. We were not prepared to defend ourselves in the hands of a precept. What was the problem? Duncan put us on the defensive. I almost missed what he had to say as a result. And what he had to say was very important. We invited Duncan back. I truly hope he accepts our invitation. Here on Way to Be TV, we teach that knowledge is hard to come by and often hotly debated. Our group is eclectic. We hold a wide variety of views. We like that. The key lies in seeing knowledge as a subset of belief. One believes in varying degrees concerning many concepts. There comes a point at which belief becomes strong enough for a person to refer to it as knowledge. In a colloquial sense, knowledge is personal. Everyday conversations do not express tightly held definitions. So let's talk about precept apologetics in general. I've listened to many precepts make their case with flustered listeners on YouTube. Christian pastors, atheists, theists, research and Bible PhDs, and the like have struggled and squirmed through many sessions with precepts. Just use YouTube's search engine and you'll find oodles of video. This is not new. The precept often begins with asking, can you be wrong about anything? You, being a humble sort, theist or atheist, might respond, Of course, I can always be wrong. Then the presup will turn to ask your basis for truth. No matter what your answer is, the presup will say in some fashion, you just said you could be wrong about that. As the conversation progresses, the presup will get in the opening major premise for his argument. And here is where the presup has my attention. The presup argument is helpful in thinking about the source of knowledge. One might consider that the development of truth, reason, and logic, that is, knowledge, is not simply a product of nature. So what then is the source of knowledge? It is a philosophical question the presup loves, and indeed worth pondering. Is there a source, a force if you will, beyond science and beyond the laws of nature that establishes knowledge? Some might even refer to this source, or as a force, as a God, or even the God. Hence the opening major premise. Unless God exists, there is no basis for knowledge. Therefore, one who claims there is no God would have no basis for the source of their own expressed truth. One might call that force God, and you might see that force as a supernatural source. Soon the opening major premise gets stated again and again and again. Then it changes just a little bit. A new version is introduced, usually without notice. The original premise, unless God exists, there is no basis for knowledge, becomes something similar to, unless the Christian God, as explained and described, exists, there is no basis for knowledge, truth, reason, and or logic. These two premises are interchangeably employed during the remainder of the conversation. From this point, one can bring to the conversation almost any subject: biblical inerrancy, omniscience, omnipotence, textual criticism, heaven, hell, Christology, the church, and on and on and on. No matter the response from the presup's audience, the presup simply retorts, "But you might be wrong about that." Or, "How do you know, since you have no basis to claim that you know anything?" Do you see the switch between premises? So what I want to do tonight is I want to get your thoughts concerning the conversation we had last week. But first I want to issue a warning, especially to Joni. Please speak to the subject of the presup apologetics that we talked about last night with him, and not to anyone's character, personality, or motives. I have not seen a single presup conversation on YouTube with anybody, and I've seen several different ones, about 3 or 4 different presups dealing with about 8 or 10 different show hosts and guests. And in each case, the show host and guests all get frustrated to the nth degree. But just remember the two premises. One is, unless a God exists, there is no basis for knowledge. All right? And then it switches to, unless the Christian God exists as described and defined, there is no basis for knowledge and or logic or truth. And then we go through this whole series of trying to talk to someone who says, we've just admitted that we don't know anything, we can't know anything, and that we could be wrong about anything. That's pretty clever, because he asked us to do it, and we did it, and then he got us. Y'all kind of, let's talk about it. Y'all tell me how you felt about last week, and if you heard the premise switch.
This is Jan, and yes, I did hear the switch that, we went from God exists, there is no basis for knowledge. And, it's going to be a hard conversation for me, because to me, all this is presup apologetic philosophical babble. And it's going to be really a tough conversation tonight.
Well, I have a tendency to agree, but everybody's got their point, everybody's got their opinion, and that's okay. But I just, I don't know. I just don't see the point of almost bullying people with your point of view. I don't think we do that. you know?
Well, I'm not sure he was doing that so much as he was just arguing, because if you heard these others, I played that clip for y'all on Sunday.
Yeah, I never have.
About Dr. Jones, and so, and his show, and where Cy Bruggencate was on there and did almost exactly the same thing to him. Now, here's the thing. You listen to all the precepts you listen to come back to that same place. What they're saying, the initial premise actually has, it's not lost on me. The argument has some legs, and I'll tell you why. Because I know that I can reason as a human being. I know that I can use logic as a human being. I know that I can know things in that if I believe something strong enough, I begin to call it knowledge. All right? I know that. And those are things that I know. But we don't have, not in evolution, not in the Big Bang, not in anything, we have nothing that explains the source of that. Why are human beings, all human beings, able to do that?
Neither does the precept apologetic. And I guess, the part where you say you have the knowledge and you have someone coming at you that is saying, well, no, you don't have that knowledge unless you believe a certain way. Right. And I think that's the problem with this conversation, or with this, what do you want to call it, debate.
If you look at the first premise, though, before the switch, if you look at the first premise, all he's saying is that since we don't know of a source for that, then what is our basis to say anything about truth or knowledge or whatever? And I understand that, but the question becomes, why would you instantly run to a supernatural source? How do you know that there's not some natural source of nature that we don't know about yet? I mean, it ain't been that long ago, in centuries anyway, that we didn't understand how people breathed. We didn't understand how the heart works. Even today, we know very little about the brain. Maybe there is a natural explanation for the source of reason and logic and truth and knowledge and so forth. Maybe there is. I don't know that there is or there isn't. A case is made for there being even something you might call God, because it's like the theos that I talk about within. You reach within yourself. Jan, you talked about having a Christian God. Okay, but it wasn't supernatural. Well, of course, he can't accept that because of the second premise. But the first premise, you could kind of accept. When someone makes a case that the ability to reason and to use logic and to have knowledge and truth and beliefs, for that matter, that all of that might have a source. All right. Now, whether it's a supernatural source or not, I don't know. All I'm saying is, I can see how someone might call that God. It's a better case for there being a God than anything. But there's a hitch in it. There's a huge hitch in it. I wanted to see if you all could come up with it. What does the second premise say, Carol?
Okay, it says that unless there is a Christian God as defined
and
in the right, that you have no basis for knowledge of any kind. And the problem I see with that is there are a lot of people in this world that have a different God, supposedly. I personally think they're all the same. And so he's basically cutting out like half the world, and saying that they have no knowledge. And I don't think that's a basis for anything.
Well, do you remember when I asked him, where does your knowledge come from? And he says, well, I get supernatural knowledge from God. You remember that? I have that on recording. Well, that's where it breaks down. Because what you wind up with then is, now we're into a different realm. And I'm going to cover this in the closing here directly, but we have entered the evidentiary world. In other words, we're no longer in the supernatural realm. If I pick up an ancient manuscript or a Bible and I say this is the inspired word of God, I've now entered the evidentiary world. And now the precept needs to be asked, how do you know? You could be wrong.
And actually, yeah, we did ask that question, as you may recall.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he needs to now account for that. But what he's saying, and most of them get down to using, I don't remember Duncan using the exact lingo, but I know most precepts will get down to the idea of the elect. In other words, it sounds almost like you know what Calvinism is, Jan?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it gets down to the tulip, total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, so preservation of the saints, or perseverance of the saints. And so when you get right down to it, it gets down to be like Calvinism. In other words, the reason I have a source of knowledge and you don't is because I'm one of the elect and you are not one of the elect. Yeah, has Colleen had anything to say so far, Joni?
Likes what Jan said when she first came on about how it was all Babel. Then she says everyone has their own personal Jesus and or God.
But the presuppositionist argument came to me in two stages, and I listened on air to other people having it presented to them, and the same thing happened, where there was this switch from just if God exists to if the Christian God as described and defined exists.
Well, I agree with you. I think that is the one flaw that is in that argument, and I think it's a pretty big one. Any religion or group of people that believes that they are the elect and that only they have the right to knowledge, only they have the right to salvation and grace, I'm sorry, but that's not acceptable to me at all.
Well, that was a big argument in the Southern Baptist Seminary when I was there. The truth is there were plenty of ministers, people studying for the ministry and so forth, that were there who did not agree with the Calvinist point of view. He owns the definition of Christianity. Well, in modern day, I can tell you from pastoring churches, the definition of Christianity is very, very different than this idea of all the proto-Orthodox Christology that was going on in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century. Very, very different.
That she also, I also know, quote unquote, the mother goddess is my earth, but my viewpoint is not the same as everyone else's. I also love the Buddhist point of view to be humble as I walk my path in this life. Jan says, and you, at least, are accepting of other people having a different viewpoint.
They couldn't be wrong, because that God has revealed the truth to them.
Right.
And that we are denying the truth, and therefore we can't see it. And it would only be, and the position of most presuppositionists is that you already know there is a God, and that you just don't want to face up to the fact there is a God, and that and you want to face the truth. That's, and they read from the scripture. But when you prove that God has said things, reading from the book where you say God has said it, and that's the only way you know it, then you talk about supernatural revelation, then it is your little personal journey, whether you like it or not. You have to develop your own points of view.
On your own journey, and it's your own personal journey. And I guess, the issues that I have, or the main issue is that no one should be telling you that your viewpoint or your God is not the correct God.
Exactly.
Well, definitely no one should be telling you that their point of view is valid and you have no basis to even open your mouth. I mean, that's kind of how it came down. I would just love to have another go at it, because I feel like that I felt defensive. Did you all feel defensive or not?
Yes.
Yeah, Joni did. Did you feel offensive, Jan? Defensive?
No, not really. More annoyed.
Yeah.
When you repeat the same thing over and over again, it's like, it's kind of the definition of insanity when you expect to have a different outcome. And our outcome has never changed. We believe what we believe individually. Elise, you believe what you believe. Joni, you believe what you believe. I believe what I believe. Right. And to have someone come and say that we don't have the knowledge because, we're humble and we can be wrong in something, we don't think we're perfectionists. I think that that's very kind of judgmental, and after a while, it just became annoying. I didn't feel defensive because I feel very firm in my belief, and no one can really shake me from it.
Well, I thought you did really well, and toward the end, you actually picked up on his methodology and started using it on him, and that's always a good way to go, and maybe he might see that you hear his methodology, and that helps a lot. But there's definitely methodology to it. In other words, it's a formula, and I've heard it from more than one presuppositionist. Yeah.
I think the thing that irritated me the most was his assumption of, and kept saying you this and you that, and telling you what you think and what you believe. And I have never, ever, ever liked anybody to do that to me, even when I was a child and my father was telling me that this is what I was thinking. And I was like, no, not inside my brain. Can't know what I'm thinking.
There's two premises. You can start out by saying God is supernatural. That's the major premise. The minor premise is you cannot prove the supernatural. And then the conclusion to the syllogism would be, therefore, you cannot prove that God exists. All right. And then the other one would be, in order for God, unless God exists, there can be no source of knowledge. You are a person that believes that God does not exist. And the conclusion would be, therefore, you are a person who can claim no knowledge about anything. And when you get right down to it, both groups of people are making a pretty darn ignorant statement in my mind, because you cannot prove the supernatural, you cannot disprove the supernatural. And why would you just simply sit in criticism of those who believe in the supernatural, or why would you sit in criticism of those who do not believe in the supernatural? Neither one of them are going to get you anywhere, and you've still skipped over whatever Jesus taught. So in the process,
and it's hard to live in community when you have so many disagreements with so many other people.
Colloquial interaction between human beings doesn't go to tightly defined definitions. Okay? The word knowledge is loosely used. The word belief is loosely used. The word logic is loosely used. The word reason is loosely used. It's none of this logical absolute stuff, and it's none of this philosophical reasoning stuff. It's none of this absolute truth or absolute knowledge stuff. It's people that just talk to each other. And when you get right down to it, philosophers, especially Christian precepts, now there's you a small minority group, okay, that doesn't represent society as a whole, and for some reason they can get on air and say, it's because all the rest of you don't have any source of knowledge, but I do, Okay.
Colleen said earlier, who is to say that God and or Jesus has not walked this earth looking acceptable to each religion? And then she says, I guess I'm the anomaly, as I have a comfortable beliefs in many different religions. Jan says, I don't think you are alone. I am comfortable with other people's beliefs too. And then Colleen says, that would be that intangible faith.
Right. I mean, when you look at us sitting around here on Sundays or whatever, we're able to coexist together, and I doubt there's any two people in our groups that are alike in their belief system.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Elise, but didn't Dunkin also talk about anytime we talked about faith, he sort of disregarded that faith was a feeling. And all he was talking about was stuff in the head, the knowledge, and so belief and faith really didn't enter into his precept.
I think what he did do, Jan, is he when Carol said, "What you have is faith," he didn't like that very much, or he turned it away. He reflected it, or whatever. And faith is the belief in things without evidence. I mean, what his own Bible that he's talking about says faith is the belief in things not seen. You're right. And so when you get right down to it, that's what faith is. And so his own personal view, and I told him, I said, you believe in God, you believe in the inerrant Word of God, and I have no issue with that. No issue at all. I believe in the freedom of belief itself. You have every right to believe what you want. Okay? But
Wait.
I'm still trying to figure out what he was trying to do coming on the show. I don't really understand what he was trying to accomplish.
Another thing that really bothered me was the labeling. You know,
Yes.
I mean, you are an agnostic. How does he know what you are? You know what I mean?
Right.
You have
Like telling
your
you what
own
you
set
think.
of beliefs.
When you get right down to it, then this idea of agnostic, nobody wants to accept the idea that there are people who just don't have an opinion about these things. I respect people who believe in God, who believe Jesus was the Son of God, who believe he was resurrected from the dead. I have no problem with that at all. I can respect that all day long, okay? And I respect people who don't have any interest in the whole subject. But when you get right down to it, is if you can't, how is it you claim to follow Jesus if you can't let other people be? What's Colleen got on here, Joni?
That oddly enough, in all my personal religious travels, most are called the way, the path, etc.
Yeah, I mean, and I would kind of agree, Colleen, because, I mean, if you have then the ultimate true knowledge, then it's like you've already arrived there. And so everybody else is still on a journey. But that the precept apologetic really has arrived and that we're just on our way and trying to find our way. I really don't believe that, but that's kind of the way it comes across.
Mm-hmm.
And that, you know, they've arrived to some place that we don't even have any idea of where that is.
Go with it, Joni. What's that?
Jan says, still precept apologetic psychobabble, and then Colleen says, maybe God doesn't believe in him. That had come across my mind. And honestly, Jan says, honestly, I really, really didn't understand the point of last week's conversation.
Oh, I think it was good for us. I think it was very good for us.
Yeah, but it's kind of good if you have some points. If you're going to be debating, usually you have some valid points that you want to sort of convey. And honestly, for me, I really couldn't connect the dots. Again, it's back to, you know, I was trying to understand the English in the words, what he was trying to get to. And he might have tried to do it in several different ways, which is why he was repeating himself. But it certainly didn't resonate at all with me.
I'm going to do the close of the show and give you the next 10 minutes off. Okay.
I would, before we do close though, you know, even though I've stated my position and stuff like that, I still believe that he has a right to believe what he believes and feel, and I would not really come across as being argumentative or, negative in any way. I mean, that's just not who I am to be able to listen to some of that stuff because it just doesn't resonate with me.
Yeah.
So it was kind of like, but I just wanted to state that before you close.
The precept argument is generally a response to non-believers, though millions of believers and non-believers disagree with the precepts. The precept asserts a non-believer cannot claim to know anything if the non-believer is also right in thinking a God does not exist. The constantly repeated responses like "how do you know?" or "you could be wrong" in response to every claim of knowledge by a non-believer is simply a tactic that distracts the precept's opponent. In the confusion and frustration, it is easy to overlook what has happened to the major premise. When it graduates to supernatural knowledge passed down only to the elect of a God, one enters the evidentiary world. The precept apologetic claims God exists as described and explained in the Bible. We are now down to human knowledge and physical evidence. While one might call the force that generates knowledge a generic God, how can one be certain that man's interpretation of what he claims a God told him to write down is accurate? The precept insists God has revealed knowledge whenever God speaks. God speaks in his word, the Bible. How do we know the Bible speaks for God? God says so. Where? In the Bible. But I guess the precept could be wrong about that. May the force be with you. Thanks for watching and being a part of Way to Be TV, where there's a better way to be than atheist or theist.